Right, so I'm Curtis. Oh, I'm not even streaming. That would be helpful. Here we go. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, can we just get a check in chat to make sure everyone can see? Yeah, everyone can see. Brilliant.
Cool. Right, there's the first slide you missed when I wasn't showing my screen. Nothing special. So, as I was saying, I'm Curtis. I've got 1 year's AAA experience now. I started a year ago on the 29th, so a couple days away from my 1 year. And I'm an environment artist at Lighthouse Games. um, Kind of a newer company. So if any of you guys haven't heard of it, we're kind of a break off from some playground games guys. Some of the higher ups there left and formed this new studio. So my route into games a little bit unorthodox, but so I did a degree at Derby Uni. So just 3 years in computer games modeling animation to learn most of my kind of modeling and Unreal stuff basis there. I went from that to actually teach game art at the University of Worcester. I had one module there, which I did for a kind of 6 month period. And in that whole kind of bit, spent a bunch of time working on my portfolio, which is kind of a lot of what this talk's going to cover, kind of tips and tricks for that. And then after that, I joined Lighthouse a year after I'd finished graduating. So, kind of a year's span that took me there. So, getting into games, the biggest kind of thing that I learned and coming from uni is finding out what you don't know, which can be tricky because you don't know it, right? So my biggest advice is always reach out to people, juniors especially, find out how they got there. A lot of people are really happy and to help you. So just reach out to them and be polite and ask them how they got there. If they'll have a look at your portfolio, maybe you can see theirs, and kind of stuff like that. And that might give you an indication of the kind of things you need in your portfolio when you're starting to put it together. And it also just makes you connections. You might have some kind of people that reach out to you and they can give you a word in studios if you apply there. You never know. Offer that courses and tutorials. I imagine a lot of you guys are already kind of doing that sort of stuff, but look at what's on ArtStation, what's on Udemy, all different types of things. So when you kind of find out from speaking to people, oh, I could do with these skills, these things are missing, find some tutorials on it and kind of upskill in that. And for that, just keep developing on those things, right? Not everything you make needs to go into your portfolio, so don't panic about that. As long as what you're doing is kind of serving you learning and eventually developing your portfolio, just keep going for it, basically. So, into that, kind of finding out what you don't know is you've got to use that, right? So, you kind of want to identify what kind of studios you want to work for. Now, this isn't going straight for one, as it's kind of highly unlikely if you sit there just applying to one over and over that you're going to get that. As a lot of you probably know, games are pretty competitive at the moment, especially getting as a junior. But it's more kind of what kind of art style do you like? And again, as I've written on the slide, it's deeper than stylized and realistic. It's a case of the kind of intricacies of that, right? Do you want to do like a realistic sci-fi kind of thing? Do you maybe want to do something more medieval and your skills kind of revolve around sculpting? There's a I forget their name, but there's an artist who got into Sony Santa Monica, who their portfolio was just a bunch of sculpt pieces of wood and doors, and that was enough because that's the kind of stuff you'd need to be doing to be working on God of War, right? Maybe working at Naughty Dog, you need to specialize more in kind of foliage work. So kind of find out what you really enjoy doing and a few studios that kind of share a similar type of work and really aim for that and aim your portfolio around that. It's obviously really important that you enjoy what you do with it, but kind of try and hone in on that because as a hiring manager or recruiter, they're looking for someone to fill a specific role. Even if you kind of read the description and you think, oh, I can kind of do all of these things. Um, I'm in line with all these things in the job description. It might be, in fact, that they're looking for someone that specializes in architecture, or foliage, or something material related. And that's not necessarily written in the job description, but it's what the person hiring has in mind, for the role, which is kind of exactly how I got hired for foliage work. So kind of that brings down to the last point of having a specialism within environment art. So it's obviously still important to know kind of the breadth of environment art and modeling and all that kind of different stuff, everything that you're probably familiar with. But honing in on a certain type of it kind of makes you more employable. Because as a junior, you kind of want to come in with more of a specialism, more of a place they can direct you, at least in AAA, and then you can begin to branch out and learn different things off of different people. Um, but even in AAA, it's likely you'll be working on similar types of things, whereas indie, you'll get a spread of things to work on. So that does kind of depend on what your preference is. But I would still say that it's a good idea to kind of pick what you want to do and learn those skills. So whether that be architecture, whether it be foliage, whether you really like modeling, and instead of environment art, you kind of want to have a look at weapons or vehicles, and really develop those skills. Just have a think about that as you kind of put together your portfolio. You have a drink. Right. So on the topic of portfolios, they're what's going to get you hired. You can have a really nice looking CV that is the best thing that's ever been designed, but ultimately, as a junior, you're going to come in and they're going to need to see what you can do. And it's not just about something visually impressive, it's also about how you construct it. So always break down your work. If it's an environment, put together a GIF or some shots that show the work in progress and how you've constructed it, what you've thought about as you built it up, from the composition to the lighting to the order in which you put details in large forms to small shapes. All stuff that someone looking at your portfolio can kind of get a read on how you approach things and whether it's the correct or incorrect way. Now, there's obviously multiple ways that it can be correct, and that's fine, but it's good that they can have an insight into it. Um, Quality, always. It's a overused saying, but it's true. It's better to have two or three really great environments than a spread of stuff that isn't of consistent quality. Because ultimately, someone's going to look at your worst piece and they're going to think, well, is that what I'm going to get if I hire them? Or is the high end thing? So having it show consistent quality just means that they have a bit more faith in what you're able to deliver. Because ultimately, as a junior, you'll be coming in and you won't have all the knowledge of a senior or a principal, but you'll be expected to deliver to the same quality. Obviously, with their feedback and input to help you develop, but quality is why you're an artist, right? So within that as well, try keep that art style consistent. It's always nice to have an experiment with different things, something stylized, something not. But ultimately, if you are trying to fill that role, that I was speaking about earlier, that they're looking for someone in foliage or architecture, for a medieval realistic game or a stylized pirate game, they kind of want to be confident that you can deliver on that art style. So keeping your portfolio consistent to that really, really helps. As well, into them having faith in what you can deliver, always put your stuff in a game engine, and that's how you should be showing it off. Props and stuff are okay to have, rendered in Marmoset or something, but if you're doing environments, put it in an engine, whether that be UE5, whether it be Unity or something else. Unreal is obviously a great bet because there's a lot of studios moving to UE5, so having that just Unreal knowledge in itself is really helpful, and can be a nice thing on your CV. But put it in a game engine. You can make really nice scenes and stuff in Blender, but ultimately it doesn't give someone that faith that you can recreate something in a game context, which ultimately you're trying to get into games. So you've got to kind of show that side of it off. And also think about how you construct these things, right? So is the try count suitable? Are the UVs suitable? Texture sizes, all these kinds of things. Have you made it modularly? Have you split apart your modules? All these kinds of things that will give someone faith that you can construct something for a game. Granted, with UE5 and with Nanite, budgets are going up, the kind of stuff you can do is going up, and there's always some breathing room for you to come in and someone to say, well, that's a bit too high or a bit too low. So visual quality, that's the most important thing, but knowing that you can optimize something is also important. As for putting together pieces, small scenes, it's always, whilst a big scene obviously can look great if you do it properly, they're often in a game context, they're put together by a couple people at once. And to get the quality out of that you need, keep it small, keep it concise, and really focus on quality over a large scene, and it will pay off. Unless you're trying to showcase something that isn't necessarily visual or more of a technical test. Maybe you're digging into PCG or something of that nature, and that's what your portfolio piece is kind of revolved around. Within that, so a good kind of baseline, if you're trying to get into games with your portfolio, 2 to 3 environments, and then 3 to 4 props to kind of supplement that. Those can also be materials. Props, they can be from the scenes you've already made. The kind of way I like to approach it was to make a kind of hero asset for the scene I'd make, post that as its own prop, break it down with UVs, wireframe, textures, all that kind of stuff, and then have the environment along with it. You can take 3 props out of it. It's fine. But at the end of the day, the environments are what you need because you're an environment artist. And so you need to see things in context. And as always, whilst developing your portfolio, ask people in industry for feedback on it, or your peers or whoever else, but ask some people in industry and work on that feedback, and you should start to get in a really good place, and that helps you find out again what you don't know. So into environments, I'll have another quick drink. None of these are mine, obviously, but what kind of things should you be thinking about showing with your environments? Because as an environment artist, you kind of dig into a few disciplines. You might be involved in lighting a bit. You might be involved a slight bit in level design, in tech art from doing some shader work and optimization. There's kind of a bit of crossover with environments. So even if you come into a AAA studio and you're not touching the lighting because there's a lighting artist in house, it's still good in your portfolio work to showcase how you think about lighting, because that also ties into stuff like composition or leading a player through a level in terms of level design or all these kind of intricacies, right? So show off your lighting, work on that. Pretty sure there was a talk on that yesterday, so that should be really helpful anyway. And then number two, composition. So think about kind of what you want the player to be looking at, right? So if we take, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not, but we take this kind of Last of Us one in the bottom left corner. In terms of a level design perspective, you have these kind of leading lines through from the cables, and the end of the tunnel is lighter, which you've got this kind of tunnel already that starts leading the player there to your point of interest at the end of the tunnel. So you can tie in composition into guiding the player, but also highlighting things you want them to see. So you've got the mountain in the background, maybe there's something interesting up there, and the trees kind of frame that nicely. The patches of the grass kind of lead you up towards the gap in the trees here. So you've got your kind of primary goal in the top right, and then you can kind of already see a secondary path through the trees. It's lit, so again, the light kind of makes you look there as opposed to this shadowed area. So thinking about that in your artwork is really important as well. It might not be a case of guiding a player through a level in a portfolio piece, but it is guiding the eye through the piece and kind of showing what you want to show and in what order. So it can always be a great thing to get someone and just say, what do you notice first in this piece? And tweak it based upon kind of whether they're looking where you expected them to or not. And that can make the difference in a good or a bad scene as much as lighting can. And they are quite closely intertwined. As for rules of the world, this one's super important. Even if you're doing something stylized, you're saying something in another universe, whatever it may be, you need to have some rules to the world that make it make sense. So we'll go with foliage first because that's kind of where I specialize in. But think about where things grow. Can they grow here? You take this horizon one. So in this shaded area, there's no flowers. That's probably because these flowers can't grow in shade. So they should only spawn outside of it. The pine trees on the top, they only spawn at set altitude. So they should only be there within your scene. How close can the trees be to each other? How typically tall do they grow? Are the leaves in proportion? All these kinds of things, right? If you've got a water source in the scene, are the correct plants growing around there? Inclines, rocky areas, temperature, all these things can kind of influence how things grow and where things grow. So thinking about that when you develop your scene and doing research into what can conceivably be there or not, even if it's something as small as you've put moss on something, well, is that facing in the correct direction that moss will typically grow in this scenario? Would moss grow here? Kind of things to think about when you kind of do it from a natural perspective. Even the texture on the ground, is that the correct soil type for these pieces of foliage? And some of the scale stuff kind of ties into composition and getting those large shapes. Dialing back to that if I've jumped too quickly, but it is really important to get things in proportion with each other as well. So if you're making a tree, are the leaves the correct size to the branch? Is the branch the correct size to the trunk? And then is there the correct number of branches up the trunk? Is the grass then the correct size along the ground where it meets the trunk? All these kinds of little things that you might not consider. And the same can be applied to kind of architectural stuff, right? So when you think about how it's constructed, are bolts in the right place, weldings, is it structurally sound? Can it be built like that? Are elements in proportion again? Making sure you've done research into kind of how these things are engineered and also how they relate to each other in the scene. So if you've got your bus stop here, should it be there? Are your curbs the correct height? How far away from the road typically are the lampposts? You can research city dimensions and find out these kinds of things and whether the stuff you're putting next to each other makes sense or not. So it's all kind of about things making sense and being constructed properly. And then we have storytelling. So this is more than just kind of saying, I'm showing off that the post-apocalyptic scene has happened here, right? It's not to a story of every level that you have to gain a huge amount of lore from it, but it's okay, you've got this sign on the lamppost in the Last of Us scene. It's pointing to an expo. There's a bit of information about it, right? There's a poster there. You have the car, you've got its number plate. All these kinds of things that make sense in it, right? If it's damaged, is it damaged in the correct places for the impact that it's had? Is the road here breaking apart in a way that seems feasible? Which again is tying into the rules of the world. And so storytelling ties in to make that kind of all make sense. So whilst you can show a story like in this God of War scene, you can also just think about how an environment sits on its own. The no stopping signs, what does that tell you? If you pick up a prop, does it, and it's a crisp packet maybe, does it have the allergens and the ingredients on the back that tell you where it came from and where it might be? If you've got a barrel, are there scratches? Where are the scratches? Because typically, like in here, barrels are designed so that you can roll them across the floor. So there should be scratches more along the rounded part of the barrel than the tops and the bottom, right? So think about a prop and its context within the scene, where it might have come from. Is it new? Is it old? And then think about how all these elements tie together to make a story throughout the scene as well. And then just kind of lastly, no straight lines is a really big thing that I've had hammered into my brain since I started. So even if you kind of look at a house outside in your street, the top isn't going to be a straight line. You're going to have some kind of sagging and bending in it where the structural beams aren't. There's always going to be a little bit of breakup on your silhouette. And that really makes a huge difference when you put things into a scene and the way the lighting reacts with it. And you don't have all these harsh edges. You have kind of nice, subtle transition points. You have it obviously more in trees, but even this tree, if you can see my cursor again, the one on the left, or even this larger one, right? Even that has some subtle waving to the trunk. So it's just not a straight line and it doesn't catch your eye out in the scene. Because I can guarantee that if you put all these trees in the scene with completely straight trunks, you'd get that kind of uncanny valley approach to it. So on from kind of environment stuff, what are some things to think about for applications? Coming in as a junior, you're kind of unlikely to have a considerable experience. You can't sit there and say you've shipped 3 titles and all this, and that's perfectly fine. So make your CV more skills oriented. So what software do you know? What can you do in the software? how long have you been using it, what have you done with it, that kind of stuff. Again, your CV is just to supplement your portfolio, but giving that information, that context can sometimes be really helpful as well. And then again, include uni games you've made, game jams, anything like that. Just shows that you are interested in games, that you've got a passion for it, but also that you have got bits of experience working in a team and putting together things with other people, which is also an important skill to have, is just the ability to pass work between each other. So, as well, show your personality in it. There's always that kind of about you section. Show what kind of things you like to do outside of gaming, make yourself feel a bit more human. You can mention how much you like playing games, what games you play, also any hobbies you have. Other than that, it just gives you a bit more of a face to the kind of name, right? More personable, more approachable. And again, that ties into showing your passion. Then, as it comes to art tests, you're probably going to get some that are unfair and not put together great. It happens. But the ones that are there for a purpose really focus on what the brief is. You can get into a habit of trying to almost overperform and overshow. But if you've been told to do a certain thing, one, showing what you've been told means you can listen to direction, which is important when it comes to being in studio, listening to your lead or the art director and doing kind of the task assigned to you. But also, if you spend a bunch of time doing stuff that wasn't asked for you in the art tests, then you could have spent that time polishing up the what you have and making it really, really good, which is probably something they'll consider on their end as well. You've done all this extra stuff, which is cool, but this, and this could have done with some more work. It would have been better if you would have kind of put your time there. But if you're unsure about anything they ask of you, you want to ask questions, ask them. That's part of it as well, making sure you're okay to ask questions, respond to feedback, all these types of things. And in a lot of cases as well, it's fine to not finish the art test. I didn't finish mine. I just put the time into creating things properly and creating them kind of to quality. And then I just wrote a quick document on what I would do if I had more time. But sometimes it's more about them seeing what you can do in a time period and how you approach things the same way as your portfolio. And kind of the necessary thing for art tests is you usually get them when they can't quite discern from your portfolio whether you will be a fit for the role, which is fine. Obviously, the more you put into your portfolio, the less likely you are to have to do one. But going for a junior role, it is usually expected of you to do one anyway, um, which can be unfortunate, but don't panic with them. And ultimately, obviously, just do your best with them. The more you do, the more feedback you get, the easier they'll be. Trying to think if I had anything else on art tests. I think that's it. So obviously CV wise, same as your portfolio, get some feedback on that, send it out to people and see what they think as well. It can just be a really good thing to compare with someone's CV who's in industry and see what little tweaks and changes you can make to yours. So a few extra little tips. Stay humble as one. It's probably quite obvious, but something that's coming into games more and more is leaving your ego at the door, which is kind of more aimed at seniors, I guess, and principals and mid-levels or people who have been elsewhere, making sure it's just a great environment for everybody. But that's not to say that you should come in with any sort of ego or anything either. Not to say any of you guys will, but it's useful to keep in mind. especially it can be quite difficult to adjust to being in a studio after coming from uni or something similar, because you come from being kind of near the top of your class, right? Your third year, you kind of know what you need to know, you've graduated, you can kind of feel quite positive about that, which is a great thing to have. When you come back into industry, you're at the bottom again. So take that, be humble, and just learn. Part of being a junior is just learning. So take in all the experience you've got around you, and yeah. But often, at least what I've experienced, is you will still have stuff to input that even people who have been in industry for 10 years might not have. You do have a fresh perspective, and that is worth it to also give that kind of confidence to yourself. Off the back of that, it can take time to get into games. It is extremely competitive, and as sad as that is, and as unfortunate as it can be, keep at it. If you're really passionate about it and you keep putting the time in, you will get out of it. It took me a year. It's okay for things to kind of take time. And on that, it's fine to have imposter syndrome as well. I get it even now. I've spoken to people that have been in industry for 10 years and they have moments of it. So when you're looking for work, can't find jobs and you're feeling a bit down on it, it's perfectly fine. And it's perfectly fine when you come into industry to feel overwhelmed as well. Because as I said, you're now at the bottom and there's a bunch to learn, but you will get there with it. Um, and ultimately have fun with it. It's art. You should enjoy it. I'd hope you do. And yeah, keep at that and just have fun with what you make, enjoy with what you make. Making games is fun, playing games is fun. So kind of keep that passion. One more thing I forgot to mention as well, going back from that, is knowing some kind of source control is really useful as well. It's not a must. Don't panic because a studio will teach you how to use it. I used GitHub for source control in a group setting in third year, which for anyone who's unaware is just so everyone can check out bits of work and submit it together without conflict. So you can have multiple people working on like kind of an Unreal project or something at the same time. But yeah, if you know any of that or want to pick some of it up, it's a useful thing to have. But again, you will be taught it when you come into industry, and each studio is probably going to use something different. We use Perforce, which is something I'd never used before, and you will kind of pick that kind of stuff up as well. So don't panic if you don't know how to pick it up or learn it. But if you want something extra, that's something to kind of look into as well.